Alrighty, you are live, Mr. Chairman. Representative Allred?
Here.
Representative Andrew?
Here.
Representative Berger?
Here.
Representative Brown?
Here.
Representative Clausten?
Here.
Representative Lawley?
Here.
Representative Obermuller?
Here.
Representative Provenza? Chairman Northrup?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. All right, we're here for House Bill 166, Education Savings Accounts. This is brought to us by our very own Representative Clausten. Would you like to take the front and center?
More people here for this.
Chairman,
The floor is yours.
thank you. I'm always nervous being left-handed now that I'm wearing pasta, but I had pasta the other night and I left the restaurant looking like a toddler, so it was a little embarrassing, but House Bill 166, Education Savings Account. So we're all very familiar with this. We've spent a lot of time on this in the interim, and again on the House floor. Very similar to House Bill 19 that failed by one vote on our first day of the session. There's a few changes in here that we've reviewed, but I'll review them with you once again. I do want to say that as a former school board member and being on the State Board of Education, how proud I am of Wyoming's teachers and our school system. We have a system that's, to me, probably the best in the country, and a lot of our national testing scores show that. So, you know, the ESA is something that we've all looked at for years. Trying to provide better education to some students who don't want to be in our school system for whatever reason that is. Hopefully this bill gives those students and their families some resources to fund them so they can actually have a better education. It also provides education funding for 4-year-olds, pre-kindergarten. So again, we know that if these kindergartners show up better prepared, they've had a year of preschool, that they learn best. We know from our dual language that when these kids learn languages and reading early on, that's better long-term for them. Hopefully by investing in these pre-kindergarten children, we'll see the benefits long-term throughout our school systems. The major changes to this from House Bill 19. House Bill 19 had pre-kindergarten funding for 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. I took out the 3-year-olds. Personally, I felt that funding for the 4-year-olds should be enough. And then also change the income status. You know, House Bill 19, anybody at 250% of poverty level or below qualified for $5,000. This expands that to anybody from 251 to 350% would get $3,000, and anybody from 351 to 400% would get $1,000.
Representative Clausten, just for clarity, would you kind of follow along in the pages, tell us what page you're on, and more importantly, the public, so they can
Okay.
follow along. Thank you.
This is a 29-page bill, so I'm not sure how much you want to go through, but I can go ahead and point those parts out for us. So the education levels start on page 4, and they continue on to page 5. On the very back, there's some information. It shows, so on your last page, it'll give you an idea of what those income levels look like. So on the last page, it says 2024 federal poverty guidelines. 250% or below is a family of 4 at 78,000. 350% 109,000, and 400% would be basically 125,000. The median income in Wyoming last year for family of 4 was $75,000, to give you a little idea of how many people in Wyoming would qualify for this. We've had a lot of questions concerning on page 9. As far as what is required to be taught. And it says, line 21, requires that ESA student receive instruction at a minimum, reading, writing, mathematics, civics, history, literature, and science. But also states right after that, no parent shall be required to include any instruction that conflicts with the parents or the ESA students' religious doctrines. This was an important part that people wanted included in this bill. After that, it talks about requirements of how it would be applied, the duties of the parents as well as our superintendent's office to go ahead and how the program would be administered, how the funds would be spent. Page 13, 70% of the funds would go to kindergarten through 12th grade, and 30% of the funds would go to pre-kindergarten levels. Mr. Chairman, would you like me to continue to review the whole bill, or we've? Okay. Page 14, there'll be a signed contract between the parent and the state superintendent, talking about attendance and the public record. It talks about to receive the ESA, they will not be an enrollee in a full-time public school. Page 15 goes into the duties of the state superintendent of public instruction to administer the ESA accounts. Page 16, she'll provide a written explanation of what's qualified under this, and then it goes into talking about what those are, how they'll be paid. It's on the quarterly reimbursements. Page 18, it talks about investigate reports the superintendent of any intentional or substantial misuse of ESA funds. You know, we know from other states that there is some fraudulent activities that go through. We've heard from other states, mistakes they've done is they've made this program too big, unmanageable for the superintendent's office, whoever's ever handling it. So their advice to us was to follow their guidelines, but make it in a manageable and a responsible manner. These next pages help try to ensure that. Again, as we go on the next page, it's all the rules and how the program will work. And there's several pages of that. Page 21, establish an anonymous telephone hotline to help report fraud. Again, we start just going into more details on the reimbursements. Page 22 at the very end, line 19, education service providers shall be given maximum freedom to provide instruction and services in their usual or customary manner to meet the educational needs of our ESA students. Page 23, line 12, responsibility of public schools and school districts. 23 is legal liability. Page 24, a child participating in an ESA program, line 12, goes into the statutes, and who provides notice of participation in the ESA program to the child's school district shall be deemed to be in compliance with the compulsory attendance requirement of this section. There's also provisions in here that the funds can be used. If a student is on an ESA, they can use some of those funds to take advantage of some of the extracurricular activities at our schools. Page 25, a parent, guardian, or other person, line 20, having control or charge of any child eligible to attend public school in Wyoming under this section shall have the option to apply for the ESA program specified by statute. Go into annual computation of district revenues. So having those children not in the school system, how that'll affect the schools. Page 27, the appropriation to start the program. Line 14. We're getting there, folks. Page 28. It talks about the 2 authorized positions for the department to run the program, as well as money to contract services necessary to implement this act. All these funds will be used for the ESA program only. And if they are not expended, they will go back into the ESA account. And that's a synopsis of a 29-page bill or 30-page bill that we've worked on for a year.
Good job, Representative. Anybody have any questions? From the committee, anybody have a question? Representative Obermuller, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My understanding is that when a child takes in one of these accounts and leaves the public school system, that the cost to the district is quite marginal in terms of the calculations. So my takeaway from that is this is just a pure add-on to the cost of education in the state. Is that how you understand the impact, part of this, on public education?
Representative Clausen, go ahead.
Yeah, as I look at this, most of these students already are not in our public schools. So you're not going to see a lot of, what we've seen from other states is you're not seeing a mass exodus of public students going to these ESA programs or private schools. You're not going to see a huge change on our schools, on the money that they're receiving. This is a way that these students can receive some funds out of our general fund. It's not out of our school funds to assist with their education.
Follow? Good. Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Clausen, have you talked with Department of Family Services about their program that they use to verify income? I think it's under title or chapter 10, but basically how are we gonna, what's the workload look like for the folks that have to ensure that someone who makes the amount of money that they make, claiming that they make, actually makes? Does that question make sense to you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Provenza, so I got to meet with the superintendent's office and also talk to LSO about that very issue. What would be the best way to handle that? I'll let the superintendent office speak for themselves, but they felt that they were capable of handling it, and then keeping it internally would be the best option for this program.
Hello? Right. Anybody else have questions for the representative? Anybody else? All right, come join us and we'll take public input. Department first, please.
Thank you. Thank you,
Afternoon, I
Mr.
guess.
Chairman, members of the committee, for the opportunity to address you today. I will try to be brief because I'm sure you will hear a lot of testimony on this issue, and you've already discussed it quite a lot in committee and on the floor. And I would start with this, that I'm supportive of the bill, and that this really, in all of this discussion, is not about public versus private. I am a proud product of Wyoming Public Schools, and I grew up with a parent that served for most of my childhood on a school board, but also regularly contributed to our local private school, and grew up with that notion of that it's about choice and recognizing that children learn differently, parents have different wishes in how to direct their child's education. Public schools are necessary for the betterment of our society and for allowing children of any background to achieve the American dream. And we're working every single day at the Department of Education to support our public schools, to work with them to make improvements so that we can improve public education. Parents deserve a choice when it comes to their kids' education, even in the most rural parts of Wyoming. And frankly, at this point in time, there isn't much of a choice, particularly depending on a parent's income level. And so what this bill does is it provides that choice. It empowers parents the rights that we know by the US Supreme Court are fundamental to direct their child's education, and it provides them a choice in education. I also want to make a couple of notes on this bill in particular. I think that it is a good compromise, and I think that the appropriate insurances are in place, whether it be accountability, whether it be regarding fraud, those sort of things. It includes a national norm assessment. And so you will, as legislators, be able to see how these students are performing on a national norm assessment. It also includes audit requirements and measures to ensure that fraud does not take place. I take the issue of fraud very seriously. And that is why we've already begun to discuss with other states how to best avoid that, how we work with vendors to ensure that we have the expertise to avoid all of that. And to Representative Provenza's question, working with DFS to determine income levels appropriately, as they are the most expertise in that area. It also, of course, includes income levels, as discussed. And the number which families receive is far less than the average ADM that our districts receive. Further, as Representative Clouston mentioned in his closing comments, the money for this program is not coming from the School Foundation Program account. And that has been important to me. And I think shows that, again, this is not a competing interest. This is about providing more options to our families. And so with that, again, we'll keep it brief, but would stand for any questions by the committee.
Questions by the committee? Go ahead, Representative Brown. Sorry, Chairman Brown.
Well, I'm not chairman in here.
Oh, you're still,
I'm just a lowly representative in here, Mr. Chairman.
thank God. Go ahead.
Superintendent Degenfelder, I'm just curious, you mentioned the Supreme Court having the rulings. I'm just curious what rulings you're talking about, because what I don't want to do is I don't want to conflate the constitutionality of what the U.S. Supreme Court has said about directing childhood education versus the constitutionality of whether or not this particular bill may be constitutional. I just want to make sure that we don't muddy those waters. So I'm curious which decision you're speaking of.
Sure.
Superintendent Degenfelder, please go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, that's a great question and distinction. So I refer to, I believe it was in the 1920s, don't quote me on that, the Supreme Court making that decision that constitutionally on the federal level, it's a fundamental right to direct education. So not speaking to some of the debates on the particular Constitution here in the state. Thank you for that question.
Further questions for the superintendent? Go ahead, Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, Superintendent. And I echo your views about, this is about both public and private education and parents having a choice and the importance of public education. I too am a product of the Wyoming public education system. And I do think that's an important point to make. And I agree with you on that. And I wanted to ask you about the issue of the cost, because the FTEs that are in the bill, the use of vendors and things like that. And I think I understand all that, but I think my question really goes to how much does it add to, in your view, by adding the pre-K? Some people have felt that would add more money to run the ECA program than if we didn't have that. I mean, do you have a view on that?
Go ahead, Superintendent.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, a lot of this, we do feel that the appropriation is appropriate to be able to administer this program. And so we'll look at all ways that we can ensure that we do that in a cost-effective manner. So that we do feel that it's appropriate at this time.
Okay. Just a follow-up.
Go ahead, follow up.
Okay, thank you. So is it fair to say that to those that suggest that adding, for example, the pre-K in creates some huge unnecessary costs? So I guess another way to say that is it's going to cost money to run an ECA program, correct?
Go ahead, Superintendent.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, correct.
Thank you.
Representative Obermiller, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So under the current funding model, I think we all know that the funding is disproportionately toward rural schools and the cost of rural schools. Small schools and poor counties get the disproportionate amount of money. When I look at this, I see the money disproportionately going to big cities. This bill does not address the issue of facilities. And if you go to our town in Casper, there's already some large private facilities supporting parochial education. The potential for that is tremendous there. The church that I attend has a church plant itself that is fully paid for, that's worth in the range of $30 to $40 million. Now, if the state wants to pay for the operations of a school at that church, what kind of facility do you think that we can do there on a private basis? So I see so there are mega churches in our town, there are mega churches in the capital city. And you talked about the money helping these little towns, but where the money is really going to end up are places where they can build the facilities, in my view. And then the other question is, as it relates to the small communities, have you analyzed the degree to which or how many students it takes to draw out of the public schools like this in order for a few parents to have their parochial school or whatever they want? Have you analyzed the dynamic of that in terms of when the public school itself goes down and we start busing remaining kids to another town? The same effect that we have in Chugwater right now with a charter school. I'm not addressing the charter school issue, but I mean in terms of the private schools. So you see the effect that happened in Chugwater. We are busing one child to Wheatland now because they didn't go into the charter school. So we didn't do a competitive school in Chugwater. We did a replacement school. So if you project that onto these small towns with these private parochial schools, where's the breaking point there? In your mind, where do we actually end up destroying the public schools in these small towns?
Go ahead, Superintendent Dingenfelder, and I would just say that sounds like consolidation to me, so.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, and I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Mrs. Obermueller as my teacher in 4th grade in public schools, so huge impact on my life. So I would say in regard to the question of this money going to larger communities where those are set up, I don't agree with that, I suppose, because I think that this bill creates flexibility for parents to use those funds in various different ways. And I also don't think that this amount and the number of students that would be impacted is large enough to shift so drastically from our public school system at this time. It's not universal. We have the income provisions. We have a limited appropriation. And so do I think that we have to analyze that? Of course. I just spoke with the superintendent in Chugwater last night about this very issue. But I don't see this. I think that this is a stepping stone and a small provision. And to Representative Clausen's point, what we've heard from other states is the best way to do it, so that you don't see those dramatic shifts before you're prepared for what the implications of those are.
Representative Provenza, you have another question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I guess I'm sort of confused by the rural school issue, given that in my district in Albany County, we had our school district unanimously approved a rural school in northern Albany County, and the superintendent's office, which you were not in at that time, but denied that. And so we have an instance where we've denied public school funding to where the public school system is trying to support rural education, yet we've shut down that proceeding. So I struggle to want to support this idea under that notion, given kind of that discrepancy. So I'm wondering, to Representative Obermueller's point, how does this help rural people when we can't get our rural public school open based on the decision of your predecessor?
Go ahead, Superintendent Dingenfelder.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Provenza, I'd love to talk about that issue. My understanding is that it was fully within the school district. And when we started with those court proceedings, but again, I am not subject to that decision-making. That was before me, and so can't speak to that. I think now that the lawsuit has been dismissed, I think we can speak more about it, but would love to visit about that and the opportunities there. I think that this bill provides for families to look at all different options of how they spend those monies. As you see, there's a list of whether it is for different curriculums, it is for different supplies, transportation, contracting with a district for some services. So they might use this money to contract with their local district. And so it just opens that up. I think when we talk about rural education, we're going to have to continue to have these difficult issues of what that looks like. Where does equity actually expand for those particular families? And so, I don't think this is the be-all, end-all with that conversation, but I do think that it's a piece and it extends an additional option for parents.
Further questions? Go ahead, Representative Berger.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Superintendent, for being here. The question I have is, do you see a potential shift in where teachers might be teaching now? Do you see parent groups pooling their money together and recruiting these really good teachers, high quality teachers, to pull out of the public school system and now just be in this group of parents and them paying them to maybe tutor or help them with their online program to help facilitate their ECAs and doing that and pulling those really good teachers out of the public school? Have you heard anything? I've heard some talk on it by some lawmakers, and that's some discussion going on right now in some communities. And how do you feel about that, I guess?
Go ahead, Superintendent Degenfelder.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, as I stated with how the bill is formulated right now in the appropriation, I don't see a massive shift. Could that happen? Sure, it could. I'm a free market economist. I think that is the way the system works. And we continue and we will continue at the Department of Education to work on how we recruit and retain teachers for our public schools. We absolutely need high quality teachers in our public schools. And we need to make sure that they have a living wage and that they're an appropriate situation for them. And so I think I see it as that is there could shift, but I think we need to pull ourselves back and say, is that a bad thing? Again, what are we at the end of the day, the focus on how we better educate our children and how we allow parents to make that fundamental decision of what's best for their children.
Representative Brown, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Superintendent, as we're starting a new program, Representative Lawley touched on this. You've asked for 2 positions. It seems to me that might be a little low. Can you explain what those 2 positions would be doing? What I fear is, and I'm going to trust your judgment on this. You're running your agency, but I fear of we're going to get those 2 positions in there, and within the next couple of years, we're going to say we need 2 more, we need 4 more to make sure that this, and we're just going to see this grow. So what I would say is, be real with us. Do you really need 4? Do you really need 6? And that's what you need? Or are we trying to keep this sellable on the floor and keep this moving with only 2 and a $400,000 appropriation?
Go ahead, Superintendent.
Mr. Chairman, Representative. So I would say first and foremost, we would like to contract out as much as possible to those who are experts in this field. I have no intention of trying to make sure that we can run this system with all of its nuances. And so that is number 1 priority. And so that is why the count is to that level, I would say. And do you have anything else to offer on that? Okay. So at this time, and of course, we will be open with that dialogue. It's important to run it effectively. And as I said, I take the issues of fraud and how we manage this very, very seriously. And the worst thing that can happen is that it fails before it's even really begun.
Go ahead, Representative Albert Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was really interested in Representative Clausen's observation that the money would be really going to the 5,000 or so kids that are already outside of the system. First of all, do you agree with his assessment of that? And then secondly, that looks like we're taking a system that's working in the private sector right now and replacing that with government dollars. Why would we want to do that?
Go ahead, Superintendent.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I think it remains to be seen who this will impact the most. I mean, we do know that we have about 6,500 non-public school students based off projections of last year. So it might be a mix. And so I think it's too difficult to say who it will impact. When I look at the numbers offered and the amount of the appropriation, do I see this as a huge jump in shifting the needle in school choice? Not quite yet. I think this is a great first step. And so that's where I don't see that mass exodus simply because of the dollars that we're talking about, and that for some families, it might not quite be a game changer. And so, but a good question that you pose, and I think with time, we will see that.
Thank you.
Representative Clausen, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Superintendent, I visited yesterday with the principal of the private school, Catholic school in my hometown. Their teachers make $20,000 less a year and with less benefits than what our public school system gets. And they do it for various reasons. I asked her about scholarships. They give 4 to 6 scholarships a year to help out needy families, but they have a waiting list of people they don't have money for to provide scholarships. She feels this will make a tremendous effort on kids being able to attend private schools They're going there already, but this will make it more affordable for something important to their families. What kind of relationship does your office have with private schools as far as communication or assisting with lunches, transportation, services, that kind of thing?
Go ahead, Superintendent.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, so at the agency, we do provide private school licensing, and I'll defer to Chief Maloney if you'd like to provide anything further on what occurs under the licensing.
It's just that we do have a person at the department that does oversee that, and it does supply information and provide a resource. I don't know that I have further information regarding that.
Yeah, I guess the follow-up there, thank you, Mr. Chairman, was just that, some of this is already established, is what I'm hearing from you as far as food and services, that our state is already working with some of these private schools on. So this is not an all-new program to the state?
Superintendent.
Well, Mr. Chairman, Representative, sure, and I think most people don't know that we in fact do license those private schools, and there is a relationship, and we ensure that's appropriate, and it's a big part of our agency. We have someone that is dedicated just to that service, and so I think that will only grow with this. And again, it just becomes, what is the best way to make sure that we're educating every child? And to your point about scholarships, we know that they provide some of those, and it might be a family that it's just that extra $1,000 that can really get them over the hump to be able to make this choice. And this choice better aligns with their values, and they're making tremendous sacrifices with their monthly paycheck in order to do that. And so I do think that this will be supportive of those layers of scholarships that are provided for the schools. And I believe you'll hear from some of those this afternoon as well.
Superintendent, I have two questions, one of which is $240,000 enough for not a suicide, but a fraud hotline? Because we set up a suicide hotline and it took significantly more than that. And then the second question is, gosh, I've got 3 kids at home and I think I'm going to homeschool them now. So how do you determine I'm not being fraudulent with that money when we were told during the interim that I can do that for free?
Mr. Chairman, in regards to the fraud hotline in particular, I'll have to check with our chief operations officer of that in particular. What we've determined is that the whole appropriation should be enough to manage all of this, but in particular on the fraud, I'll get back to you on what we expect that to cost. And then in regard to homeschool parents and fraud, I mean, I think that is where this will be a tremendous effort in our rules to make sure that we have those safeguards in place, that we work with these vendors. And again, I have several of my counterparts from across the country that I'm meeting with here in a couple of weeks to discuss some of these issues and how we avoid those.
Thank you, Superintendent. I'm sure we'll have more questions, but we have quite a bunch of public here that would like to testify, and we don't continue. I hope we don't continue to interrogate you longer than we can, but it's.
Mr. Chairman, the Senate interrogates me far less.
Oh,
just
well,
telling you.
good to hear it.
But I'm available at any time to talk this through and how we can effectively manage it within the agency anytime.
And please stick around because I'm sure more questions will occur.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to open up public comment. Anybody else? Anybody else? Go ahead. Please step up. There's 3 chairs. Fill them up. Let's crank through these because we have to be back at 1:45.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Nate Martin. I'm a trustee on the Albany County School Board, speaking just for myself, not on behalf of the board. And I realized hearing the superintendent's comments that this might be a more appropriate question for the department, but I just wanted to relate a disturbing scenario that happened in our district and inquire as to how it would be handled in schools that are under the purview of this program. And that's that we've had a few people, and I didn't get deep details because it's a personnel issue, who applied for positions in the district who had a criminal history of sexual abuse of minors. And it was only because of our school district's personnel policies that we were able to, or that compelled us to run the appropriate background checks to flag these people and make sure that they weren't working around students. And I was just curious, whether the licensure for private schools or homeschools requires these entities to run background checks, or if this new law, new program would be potentially opening up an avenue where public money, taxpayer money, would be potentially funding sexual predators to work with children.
It's a good question, and we'll continue to research it.
Thank you.
Any other comment?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Tate Mullen. I'm the Government Relations Director for the Wyoming Education Association. I'd like to answer a couple of questions that were posed here previously before launching into my testimony. Representative Obermuller has asked on a number of occasions, how is this going to benefit our rural students? The fact of the matter is that it does not benefit rural students. What these policies historically have done is benefit larger communities, and they are subsidies to wealthier families who already have their students in private and parochial institutions. If we want to talk about the impact of cost in terms of rural schools, that's where we get our disproportionate cost of education per pupil student funding piece, right? It costs more in those smaller communities to educate because we value equity. All it takes is removing a few students from that school to go to a parochial or a private school, and you will see a substantial cost inflation with that per pupil amount. Why do I bring that up? I bring that up because for a few years, we've had discussions about the cost of education. And when we see that per pupil amount go up, and we continue to hear things like bang for our buck, this is why our cost will go up. So just please be aware that that is a factor. The other piece, and I wanted to get to Representative Brown had asked a question about those costs, whether it was the FTEs or costs associated with programs like this. Again, historically, what we have seen, the Education Law Center, Southern Poverty Law Center, have all very well documented that the costs associated with these programs balloon. For example, Arizona, in fiscal 2008, total spending in Arizona for the 2 voucher programs then in existence amounted to $67,000. By fiscal year 2019, it was at initially $67 million. By 2019, it was at $250 million. This is replicated in numerous states that have these. You will see costs escalate with this. And with that, I'm going to jump into my testimony, and I will keep it brief because I know we have other folks here. So I have submitted a number of comments during the interim regarding the topic of voucher bills, and specifically this proposal, House Bill 166. Knowing that this topic will garner significant public comment, keep it brief. Unlike previous testimony, I will be providing you information related to WA's independent policy analysis of this bill. We utilized 5 different evaluation criteria. Those include equity, cost effectiveness, political feasibility, administrative feasibility, and effectiveness. Our analysis compares the status quo as a policy option to the proposed language in House Bill 166. I'm going to go through these rather quickly, give some highlights, but if you have some questions about how we define our criteria or some of the findings, I'm happy to answer those. In regards to equity compared to our status quo, this policy option comes in low. The burden for such policies are unequally distributed amongst the population and specifically negatively impact the following groups: special education students, minorities, low-income families and students, rural students and families, those with different religious affiliations, as well as our LGBTQ students. Cost effectiveness also came in low, and I'd like to touch a little bit on this. Well-documented learning loss with these types of policies drastically reduce efficiency. We have seen in a number of states where the learning loss attributed to voucher programs exceeded that of the COVID-19 pandemic. That learning loss is attributed to a number of variables, but most significantly the predatory nature of many online education service providers. That learning loss increases overall cost because when the student returns to the public education system behind, that's where those costs increase because we're looking at potential IEPs for those students. And as we know, IEPs in special education is a significant cost driver for education. The other piece I'd like to get to is that quality education depends on quality educators. Without requiring specific licensure, and I know the department had talked about that licensure, but there are some variations amongst what that licensure looks like for teachers. Representative Clauston brought up that they make significantly less. My concern is what does their licensure and certification look like? Now, it's uncertain what type of education those students will receive. Inversely, $40 million to private and religious schools at a time where we are underfunding K through 12 education and dealing with substantial teacher shortages, these dollars would be more cost effective in our public schools, where 93% of our students receive their high quality education. For perspective, $40 million additional in K-12 would provide close to 700 teachers across the state of Wyoming, or much needed, well-deserved increased salaries for those existing teachers. We talked about ballooning costs. There are concerns that private and religious schools, what we have seen evidence from, that they raise their tuition rates when programs like these are implemented and pocket the difference. Programs also have substantial costs associated with fraud, waste, and abuse. The minimum amount that we were told to expect with programs like this is at minimum 10%. And that's if it's administered by an agency and a department that is well suited to administer a welfare program. For context, in fiscal year 2022, fraud and waste associated with the child nutrition program was 1.7%, WIC 1.3%, SNAP 7.4%, child care assistance 1.3%. There are significant legal barriers to this legislation. There are a number of constitutional provisions, whether individually or at the whole, provide us with a good idea of what our state's founding fathers were intending, not to use public taxpayer dollars for private or religious schools. Administrative feasibility came in low. We've talked about this. The charge of WDE has never been to design, implement, or oversee a substantial welfare program. That task has always been found with the Wyoming Department of Family Services, again, specifically, as Representative Provenza noted in Chapter 10 of our Wyoming statutes, the Welfare Fraud Prevention Act. Housing the administration of a welfare program with a department that has historical knowledge of how to administer such a program might increase the political or administrative feasibility. Projected fraud rates for this type of program assume administrative charge to the appropriate agency and department. However, the administration of welfare programs with departments such as DFS, they give us that low fraud rate that we looked at. I will end there. I feel like that's quite a bit, and I know other people are waiting, so I will stand for any questions.
Representative Clauston.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mullen. Oh, I thought he said Clauston.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Berger. So that's good. So, thank you, Mr. Mullen. So just, looking back at your statement on Arizona, it seems like Arizona's cost ballooned once they went to universal. They didn't start off at universal, but once they did, that's kind of when you saw it balloon. Just your thoughts on the changes that we saw there. And then also, one of the things that you read about Arizona is they have such a population increase, like in Phoenix. It actually feels like they feel like it saved their schools. They couldn't build schools fast enough, and the ESA program, actually, when they went to universal, helped that. The average cost of a student in Phoenix is $14,000 in public education. They give $7,000 if you do an ESA universally. So I guess just thoughts on how maybe that some of the benefits to the ESA in Phoenix specifically, or in Arizona, but also, when we talk about these ballooning costs, what your thought of the change as they open the program up.
Mr. Mullen, go ahead.
Chairman Northrop, Representative Clauston, a couple of questions in there I'll answer. First and foremost, the ballooning costs. That was not the only state that has seen that. The Educational Law Center, the materials that I provided during the interim is a case study of 8 different states, including Florida, Indiana, Georgia, Louisiana, Ohio, that all saw paralleled ballooning costs with these programs. Admittedly so, right, for the case I mentioned earlier with Arizona, that is what they have seen, is that we start this program, this is the foot in the door, right? And then the moment that foot in the door is there, it expands, because the next thing you know, we're looking at increasing the federal poverty limit, or we're removing those thresholds, those tiers, or we're opening it up to everybody. Or to Representative Brown's point, maybe the administrative piece, the FTEs that we have aren't enough. There are a number of reasons that we see that ballooning cost. I can't speak to how they feel it saved their education system. It's just not something I'm privy to. I wouldn't be in my realm to speak to that. But those ballooning costs are not just associated with Arizona or their universal. It's something we have seen across the United States with these types of programs.
Representative Berger, you have a question? Okay, anybody else down here? Representative Provenza.
Thank you. I guess to follow up to Representative Clausen's question or point is, do you happen to know kind of what the performance of Arizona students are in comparison to Wyoming's?
Go ahead, Mr. Mullen.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Provenza, I could look up their NAEP scores for you and provide that. I don't have that on hand. That's an easy lookup if we wanted to look at that.
Further questions for Mr. Mullen? Thank you, sir, for your testimony. Please state your name, sir.
Good afternoon, Chairman Northrup and committee members. My name is Paul Montoya. I'm from your hometown, Chairman Laramie. I'm actually here to speak in favor of House Bill 166, the Education Saving Account. After our last comments, this is the other side of the coin. I'm real happy, Representative Clausen, to see a very well-written proposal bill before this committee and legislative body. This type of plan will advance education in our state to a new level, I believe. It's long overdue here in Wyoming. Opponents of this bill have been very creative in nicknaming this bill as a welfare for Catholic schools. I see a totally different outlook. I feel that's a very selfish and narrow point of view. This proposed bill really is an opportunity for all students, even those that can't afford to attend a private or parochial school. And I think people are forgetting that part of this. Why do opponents of this bill feel only public schools can provide good education? That's a question to ask. We should be excited to have any qualified group or parents provide the best education for our children here in Wyoming. We don't take this attitude with other public functions. It'd be foolish if here in Wyoming we were to say that only Wyoming of Transportation can build all of our roads. No, they set standards. We set standards in the state, what we'd like to have, and we have qualified companies build these roads. So this isn't any different than that. We have certain standards that we set, and we ask for individuals that can fulfill those standards. My wife Lynn and I have 2 grandchildren that live near Tucson, Arizona, so we can answer some of the questions about performance that have been brought up. Their parents homeschooled them most of their lives. 2 years ago, when the grandkids became teenagers, their parents decided to enroll them into public school because of Arizona's Education Savings Account program. They were able to place the kids in schools that fit their individual needs. They were a little concerned about this, as this would be their first time enrolled in school. After 2 years, they have excelled in their education, one more proficient in the arts and the other in a direction in computer skills and possibly marine biology, we hope. Had it not been for Arizona's ESA program, I'm not sure how my grandkids would have had these resources. This bill may not be perfect, but it really does a great job addressing qualifying the issues of qualifying education service providers, program eligibility, and administration by our state superintendent. And I, as a parent and a grandfather, I urge this committee, I can't tell you to not listen to the lobbyists and activist groups, but I ask you to rather give a little bit of preference toward the parents and grandparents that really care about their kids' education in our state. And with that, I'll stand for any questions you might have.
Questions for Mr. Montoya? You're off the hook. Thank you, sir. Anybody else like to testify? Anybody online?
Mr. Chairman, you do have Melissa Whelan online.
Let her in, please. Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. I'm Dr. Melissa Whelan, principal at St. Anthony Tri-Parish Catholic School here in Casper. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you again on the Educational Savings Account Bill, and I appreciate the work of Representative Clausen and Davis and Senators Barlow and Landon for introducing this bill. As I mentioned in November, as a Catholic school leader, I believe that parents are the primary educators of their children, and this bill allows all the parents the opportunity to choose the best educational setting for their child. It allows that choice for parents, particularly supporting those most vulnerable in our community, the poor. I respectfully ask that the committee consider 2 changes to this bill. One would be that the previous bill included a clause protecting the admissions policy of the schools. And although we can create requirements for admissions as a private school, it would be beneficial to restate that accepting these funds does not require a school to change its admissions policy. Additionally, I ask that the committee consider including 3-year-old students. Early childhood education is an important foundation for academic success for students. And for these families struggling to make ends meet, books and experiential learning trips are not often provided. And those opportunities help students succeed academically, and providing these early in life does make a difference. Just a few comments regarding some questions and comments previously mentioned. Catholic schools in the diocese do require criminal background checks, not only for our faculty and staff, but for all volunteers who work with our children. Our preschool is governed by the regulations of the Department of Family Services. The majority of our faculty are licensed by the state of Wyoming, with potentially the exception of our theology religion teacher who can't get that licensure. By including the nationally norm reference tests, you're ensuring that the quality of education meets the standards. And since the monies do go to those who are of lower income, we will not be raising our tuition drastically, but rather affording families who struggle to pay the opportunity to attend. Thank you for all of your service to the people of Wyoming, and I respectfully ask that you support this bill, giving families the freedom to choose the best education for their children. I will stand for any questions.
Thank you. Your policy is that you do background checks for sexual predators so that you don't have to hire one, correct?
Not only for hiring, but also for anyone who volunteers in the building with the students. So yes.
Thank you. Further questions from the committee? Thank you for testimony.
Thank you.
Anybody else like to comment besides Mr. Winters? Come on up, have a seat, please.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman and committee, my name is Nathan Winters, president of the Wyoming Family Alliance, and I just want to compliment the bringer of the bill on the hard work he very evidently put into this bill, and also on the work of the committee over the interim as well. I just have 2 questions for you, or at least recommendations. I do appreciate that this is now staggered as far as how much would be given in 3 different categories here, but I would recommend, if you could bump that 5,000, this is on page number 4, starting at line 18. If you could bump that 5,000 at least to 6,000 or a little higher. The average in the state of Wyoming, according to our research, has been that elementary schools generally charge about $7,060 on average for a child's education. And I think that if you were to bump that up for a person who is lower income, I don't know, $1,000, $2,000 is still something that could be cost prohibitive. And so at least closing the gap some could be very helpful. And I would recommend you do that if you could with a 3,000, if you bump that to 4, and the 1,000 if you bumped it to 2, I would recommend that as well. I think it would tremendously help a lot of families in this circumstance. The second thing I just wanted to raise is right now that you have moved this to 4-year-olds, and you still have 30% of the funds going to pre-K education, and then the other 70% going to kindergarten through 12th grade, so 12 separate grade years. It might be good if you also could adjust that first number down to some degree, so that we could ensure that the vast majority of the students I would anticipate who would be looking into this could get what they need. And that would be your regular K through 12 education as opposed to the pre-K. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for any questions.
Thank you, Nathan. Any questions for Mr. Winters?
All right.
Go ahead, Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Winters, Would you support your public tax dollars going to a school that was run by the Satanic Temple?
When you look, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Committee, I caught that, yes. When you look at the opportunity right now for people to send the child to the school of their choice, that should be the decision made for the parent. And so when you look at protecting parental rights and giving them the opportunity to, if that was their belief system, you have to understand that's a parent's choice. And so when we look at a person sending a child to receive the education they feel is best for that child, that should be a parental right.
Further question? Go ahead, Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, Mr. Winters. I'm sorry, but I missed your second point.
Yes, ma'am.
I heard the suggestion on the raising up to 6,000, but there was a second point that you made, and could you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Yes, ma'am. Mr.
Please go
Chairman.
ahead, Mr. Winter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Lawley. Yes, ma'am. The second point was right now, the way it's apportioned in the bill is that 30% of the funding would now be going to one age year, and then 70% of the funding would be going to K through 12. So I think actually that's more like 13 age years. And so that apportionment probably should change is the second point I wanted to raise.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Further question? Thank you very much for your testimony. We appreciate it. Anybody else? Going once? Going twice? All right, we're going to close public testimony. It's 1:21. We have 20, oh, we have adequate time. Committee, what's your pleasure on the bill? Moved by Lawley. Who's second?
Second.
Seconded by Ocean Andrews. All right. So I see lots of amendments floating around, so let's go through this page by page, and when we get to the page, will you please bring your amendments? Okay, page 2, anything in curriculum or education savings account? Page 3, more definitions. Go ahead, Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee, you have a handout that covers what I'm about to go through, and it goes through page 4 and then even into page 15, but it's all related. One of my concerns, I do support, as a matter of public policy, incentivizing pre-K education, and I've spent a good bit of time trying to, I think, what I would call tighten up this bill to make sure we're hitting that target and we're hitting it well, so these kids will be ready for kindergarten. And so this is what the purpose of some of this language is. So we start here on page 3 at line 20, and we insert the following. Pre-kindergarten means an educational program with the primary goal of preparing children for kindergarten that provides up to 1 school year of education prior to entry into kindergarten. And then on page 3, line 22, we delete the word preschool and insert the word pre-kindergarten. And then there's a renumbering that goes on. And then the last thing is on page 15, where on line 21, after science, I am suggesting we insert the phrase, and for pre-kindergarten, ensure ESA students at minimum receive instruction necessary for preparation to enter kindergarten.
Been moved?
Moved it, yeah, I'm sorry.
Moved by Lawley, seconded by Brown. Discussion. No discussion occurring. We'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Go ahead, Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to try, and I have a large amendment that I gave you all that has multiple amendments in it, so we can just divide it up. But I think where this amendment starts is on page 3, line 11. After students, insert period, education service provider shall not include education programs that are provided solely online. And then that continues on page 4, line 3, after state, insert semicolon and delete the balance of the line. And there might be more, Mr. Chairman, if I get a second, I'll explain why.
You're dividing the amendment that you handed out to us?
Given we're going page by page of the bill, I think,
Well, you can do it all at once, like.
I think the committee would rather cut it up, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, second for discussion.
Been moved by Provenza, seconded by Brown. We're gonna do the first 10 lines of the proposed amendment, correct?
We're going to do basically, Mr. Chairman, and we can make this conceptual amendment, but essentially, and LSO drafted the language, so they would use the language that they made in the amendment. What I'm trying to do is prohibit ESA funds going to online schools. We've heard a lot of discussion about online schools being not performing very well. They don't meet the rigor. And I think that it's important that we consider kind of potential detriments that we're going to be contributing to, given that if these schools fail, or if a student decides to go back into public school, if they've really fallen behind, it's going to cost the state quite a bit of money to get them up to speed. So I see Representative Lawley can't contain herself, so I'll just let her go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I speak in opposition to that amendment. I think that we have guidelines in place with certification processes of online schools, and then there's the nationally normed testing taken every year to try to monitor that issue. Again, it's about choice of parents, and so to take out wholesale a choice for them, I might be open to something that tries to address some of those issues specifically, but to take it out as a choice, I just don't support it.
Further comments on the amendment? Go ahead, Ocean Andrews.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also speaking in opposition to this amendment, we had a little bit of a discussion earlier about opportunities for rural students, and an online program is available to everybody regardless of where they are in the state. So I think, especially for people who live in the most rural parts of the state, this could be a good choice that's available to them.
Thank you for the comments. Anybody else? None appearing, will proceed to vote on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
No.
Show of hands, please. All those in favor, please raise your hand. 3, what do I see? All those against it, please raise your hand. Yep, that motion has failed. Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next amendment is pretty large, but conceptually what the next amendment would do is change who is overseeing the eligibility of this program, so who would receive ESAs, to Department of Family Services or in conjunction with the superintendent. So taking this back to Title 41, Chapter 10, to allow the Department of Family Services, who already does this, to oversee whether someone is eligible. And there's a whole slew of things that they check for, but it would just kind of put people in the process that already exists, instead of asking Department of Education to kind of take this over. And I think it would be a good service to not waste our taxpayer dollars on potential fraud. So I think Department of Family Services would be better allocated or equipped for this type of work. I move that conceptual amendment. Thank you.
We have a conceptual amendment discussion. Go ahead, Representative Lawley.
Again, opposed to the amendment. Department already talked about the fact that they would coordinate with the Department of Family Services concerning financial eligibility, which I think is what you're aimed at here. And I don't feel like we need to change the statute to do that.
Anybody else want to discuss it?
Question.
Doesn't mean you don't have to stop just because he called a question. If you'd like to discuss it further, you certainly may.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, I want us all to recognize the gravity of what we're doing. We're giving taxpayers money away in violation of the state constitution to private entities and individuals. And if we're going to do that, then let's do it right. We have an entity that already does that right. And I think we need to ensure that we're not putting a further burden on the superintendent's office, Department of Education, and this is something that they do not do. This would ensure that the folks that are already experts at this can do this.
Any further discussion? Go ahead, Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Against this amendment, I think we've heard from the superintendent's office that they can handle this and they will coordinate with DFS. Constitutional question, I think that's been avoided. These are general funds, they're not coming from the school funds. So, and there's Supreme Court cases, right, that if we're going to give money to private schools, the parochial schools are also included in that. So against this amendment, I think this is set up as good as we can have it. I think in a couple of years, when we can reevaluate this and hear from the department and see how everything is working.
Okay, further comments? If not, proceed to vote. All those in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Those opposed?
No.
That amendment has failed. Would you like to continue on, Representative Provenza?
Sure. Why not? It's been a fun day. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So conceptually, I would like that the state superintendent produce a report to the Joint Education Interim Committee annually on or before October 1st of each year to include things like demographic data on students enrolled. And I listed a bunch of these in my amendment, but essentially I want to have some sort of quality check on this. Making sure that our taxpayer dollars are going to programs that are good for students. Hopefully, that report will tell us that we are doing a good job, that our state tax dollars are going to the right folks, and really benefiting education. But it will serve as a quality check if it's not. So my motion would be to move a report that looks at all of the demographic data, whether parents were advised that accepting ESA constitutes a waiver of student rights, because we see that there are issues with IDEA and other special education. So just wanting to have a report of what we're paying for, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Provenza. I'd also like to see in that report maybe a report on not who, but the numbers of students. Also like to see the amount of money spent. I'd also like to see the how they did a nationally normed test. Is that a motion that you made?
No, sir.
And moved by Provenza, seconded by Allred.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Brown.
Mr. Chairman, just based off of what you just said, and I heard a whole bunch of stuff from Representative Provenza, I'm thinking if you're all okay with it, fine, let's move that forward because I don't have a problem with that. But I'm also wondering if maybe it's not a better idea to have you guys put it all together in one perfect amendment and bring it in committee of the whole.
We can certainly do that. We can leave it as it is conceptual and vote it up or vote it down. So
Whatever you guys want.
anybody else? Nope. Anybody else want to comment on this? Go ahead, Representative Obermuller.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So lay out for us exactly what we're voting on in terms of lines and page numbers right now.
Take it away, Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So starting on page 27 after line 12.
I'm looking.
On the amendment,
on the
it's just all
amendment.
section 3, correct?
Oh, yes, it is section 3 of the amendment.
Thank you.
And then whatever I added.
I'd prefer to wait and have amendment done in committee of the whole, but because there may be other things as we go
Well,
through here.
we got a motion on the floor, so we'll either vote it up or vote it down.
Question.
Question being called. All those in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
No.
I'm gonna have to have hands. 1, 2, 3. Okay, those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes, it did die. We'll get something put together for committee of the whole. Go ahead, Representative Provenza.
Mr. Chairman, we still have Wednesday. Would propose maybe we hold this bill back until Wednesday. We'd have a discussion about this so that we can have a better bill for the floor. If this is something it sounds like the committee's interested in, we can make sure that the amendment is good. Bring a bill forward to the floor with a committee of the whole amendment.
Let's continue working the bill and see how our allotted time works out. Further amendments on the bill. I guess we're just working it right up to the end. Anybody else? Anybody else? Okay, so I have one. I'd like to get rid of the third tranche. And I'd love to use that word finally. So I'd like to get rid of the third tranche and which is a 400. I'm pedaling through it.
The 400,000.
The 400,000, or yeah. The very last.
Section
the-
4, subsection B.
Mr. Chairman, is this page 28, line 16?
That's the appropriation.
We're talking that.
Yep, that's what I'm talking. No, I'm talking about we have 3 categories of availability. Thank you. Page 5. Page 5? Yes, it is. It is on page 5. It is the lines 5 through 9. So that's my motion. I'd like to delete page 5, lines 5 through 9. We get a second?
Second, because I like you.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Anybody? Okay, we'll proceed to vote. Go ahead.
So what is it you're wanting to do with 1 through 5?
Page 5, lines 5 through 9, delete.
Delete it.
Representative Clausen, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to be clear here, you would be limiting it, you'd be taking out the $1,000 for anybody at the 400%. So our income level would end at the 350%.
That is correct. Anybody else? Any more discussion? Question being called. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? No. Okay, show of hands again. All those in favor, please, raise your hand. 5. Those opposed? 3. All right, that motion's been passed. Okay, anybody else have anything else on this bill? They'd like to add, subtract? Okay.
Question on the bill?
Mr. Chairman.
Please, general statement, go ahead. Representative Obermiller.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to read a statement, and the reason it's written rather than just talking it is I trust myself better with thought-out words than off the cuff. This committee meeting was started with the statement that this is not about public versus private, but I would disagree with that. I think it's very much about public versus private. I once had a construction client that had a sign at their gate that read, "If you have no business here, you have no business here." That should be the message we affirm today regarding the government's place in the affairs of the church. It has no business there. For 133 years, all of the history of Wyoming as a state, churches with privately funded school facilities and privately funded scholarship programs for low-income families have thrived. Parochial education totally relies on constitutional protections to keep the coercive influence of public money away from the church. Authentic parochial education thrives on a strong mission statement and buy-in from its members who support it. This is the strength of the parochial education system. People dedicated to the mission, wanting to speak the name of Jesus into the lives of children, and willing to sacrifice time and money to serve. To churches with declining membership and waning internal support, I say to you, the government is not the answer to what is clearly a spiritual problem. When parents owe their allegiance and gratitude toward the government for their ability to attend a parochial school, the church as a separate, distinct, independent body will be forever diminished, the culture altered. The government cannot help parochial education. What government pays for, people stop paying for. What government pays for, people stop paying for. It is human nature. This is a classic example of when helping hurts, when the responsibility of churches and parents is usurped by the government, and later people ask what happened to their independence. The best school choice method is what we have had for these 133 years. Exceptional public schools, wonderful, inspired, privately funded parochial schools. It's a great system. It's a legitimate competition. Let's keep it that way, and may the best schools win. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anybody else have a statement they'd like to make?
Mr. Chairman, quick statement.
Go ahead, Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the passion on both sides of this. And what I'll say is, serving on this committee for the past 8 years now, there's been a lot of discussion. A lot of discussion back and forth on the public school mainly. The part that gets me is the discussion was a completely different discussion just 7 years ago, when we were looking at $400–500 million a year shortfall in our education system. And we were being hit left and right with, why doesn't education take a cut? Why doesn't education take a cut? Why doesn't education take a cut? Nowhere during that time frame did I see anybody try to bring forward an ESA bill to bring us $40 million to fund education outside of the the public education system. We're seeing it now because we have money. I don't have a problem with the idea that we have the money. So I guess my biggest question is does this amount to an entitlement that can be cut? We heard about this every single day for my first 2 years of legislative session. Heard about it every single day. What are we going to cut from the education system? How are we going to cut the education system? The education system needs to take their fair share. So when I start hearing that from the public out there in the world, my question is can this be cut? Is this going to be a discussion that we have out on the floor when we have another downturn in our economy of $500, $600, $700 million again? Is this the first one on the chopping block? And do we start telling people we can't afford this, so we're going to send your kids back to public school? Is that a discussion any of us are willing to have? On the opposite side of the argument, I would say this is the same boogeyman, just in a different state. These types of discussions have been had in numerous other states all across this country. I have yet to see a single public school system completely collapse and fail our students. So I think it's a very, very tough decision up here on this dais. I think everybody sitting out there certainly has their opinion on where they weigh, but I think it's also incumbent upon us to make sure that we're doing a balanced act here when we make this vote and we take this to the floor, if we make it out of here. That everybody out here and everybody on those screens understands that this is not an easy decision. This is not one that can just be made lightly. This is not one that can just be determined by the snap of a finger and that I support private education because of X, or I don't support private education because of Y. This is a lot of work. Our education committee spent countless hours over a bill very similar to this, and it had dang near unanimous support. So I'm going to support this because I believe that this deserves the full discussion of the House of Representatives. I believe we have a lot of people that believe that this will help them. Let's have a discussion with 90 or with 61 other members besides myself here. And let's push this forward and see what happens here. But don't be surprised if this bill dies. There's a lot of people that believe that our public school system is doing well, and I'm one of those. I don't see private schools knocking down the doors at Wyoming's borders to get started here. What I do remember very quickly and very vividly is us trying to dishevel our public education system just 7 short years ago when we had a $700 million a year shortfall. I will remember this just as quickly as I remember that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate everybody's work and comments and efforts towards this bill, and against it. But I strongly believe that we need to start looking at opportunities that need to be provided in the public schools. More opportunities for CT, more opportunities for graduation paths, more opportunities to really reach the individuals, and more opportunities for parents to make a choice within our public systems. We have wonderful public systems, and I think they're great. And I think we can continue to grow those pathways from here to make them so much more broader that we don't have to worry about these opportunities or the decisions, because there'll be plenty of decisions and choices for parents. And that's why I'm here today, just voting against this, because I want to take care of every opportunity pathway we can before we get to this. Thank you.
Representative Lawley, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, of course, am in favor of this bill, and I feel like it's a false choice to say we have to choose between public education or supporting parents with choice. I think we can do it well. This bill seeks to balance that well, and I believe that public education will remain the choice for many, many parents. And I support fully continuing to do, as Representative Berger mentioned, really supporting our public education system and providing those choices also within the system. But this is the way I would give you some comfort, those of you that are concerned about that. The Wyoming legislature has a constitutional duty to sufficiently fund public education. That has not changed with this bill, and it will not change. And that gives me comfort, and I think it should give you comfort. And again, I do want to join with my other partners up here on this committee to continue to make public education innovative and strong. And so this is not a choice, and I just feel like that's a wrong way to look at it personally, but I do support this bill strongly.
Representative Berger has the First Amendment up on the budget bill. We are officially 3 minutes late.
Representative
Not Berger, I'm
Brown?
sorry, Brown does.
Okay.
So, knowing that, will you please call the roll so we can get up to the Second Amendment on the budget bill?
Mr. Chairman, on House Bill 166, Education Savings Account 1, Representative Allred.
Aye.
Representative Andrew.
Aye.
Representative Berger.
No.
Representative Brown has left an absentee vote of aye. Representative Clauston.
Aye.
Representative Lawley.
Aye.
Representative Obermuller.
No.
Representative Provenza.
No.
Chairman Northrup.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, you have 6 ayes, 3 noes.
All right. Thank you. We will pick up the remaining bill we have on Wednesday. We're adjourned.